Scotty, it's just you and me today, mate. MG is out of action. He's obviously just trying to take care of himself with his back at the moment. He's on some pretty heavy meds and he's just decided to sit this one out. Hopefully he's back next week. But just you and me, mate. So we've got a bunch of questions we're going to get through. But yeah, I think I'll talk a little bit about MG's back because I took him to the surgeon last Friday and he was moving very gingerly. Like in and out of the car was pretty difficult. He wasn't walking too smoothly. I felt really sorry for him. He was actually in a fair bit of pain. I'm sure he won't mind me telling everyone what the surgeon said and kind of the update because I'm sure he would have given it if he was here. But basically, he has a bulge in L5-S1 and the actual disc size is a little bit smaller than all the other discs. It's actually typically the largest disc in the lower back. And it's actually the smallest one in his lower back at the moment. And it's got a bulge on the left side. And what the surgeon basically said is that bulge, the fluid is obviously exposed. It's very, very acidic. It's touching a nerve. It's causing a lot of inflammation, a lot of pain. But it's possible that the body can heal itself. So instead of jumping straight into surgery, they're going to try to allow the body to heal itself. So they gave him cortisone tablets to ease the pain and the inflammation for about a 10 to 12 day period. And at that point in time, he has to try to stay lying down as much as he possibly can to really take the pressure off that disc so that it can help heal and repair. And within that 10 to 12 day period, if he goes back to the docs and there's no change in the symptoms, then it's a surgery. But the surgeon seemed to think that it was more so 80% should recover, 20% potentially needs surgery. But talking to him and seeing how he is, he's not good. So yeah, so he's got an appointment with the surgeon on Friday this week, so in a couple of days, and they're obviously going to make a decision. Now the surgery he said is just keyhole, so they go in there, they literally just like cut off the bulge and just pull that excess disc that's bulging out. They just take it off, and they must obviously seal it up so that it's no normal fluid comes out, and then it'll be instant pain relief because it will no longer be touching the nerve,
creating all that pressure.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like there's never any good time to have an injury, but you know he's got the baby and he's moving house in 2.5 weeks, so not ideal at all. So really feel for him.
Yeah, it's no good. Hopefully he's back in action soon.
Yeah. We did get a lot of questions asking how he was, so that's a little update. But we got questions like, did he do it during exercise? You know, in general, why are people getting a lot of back issues? Is it movement-based? Is it structural? What do you think, Scotty? Typically, back injuries, lower back, bulges, is it movement-based? Is it structural? Is it just bad luck? What would be the normal reason why it happens?
Well, with MG, it wasn't an injury that he attained in the gym. I mean, he trained the day before and he was great. He literally got out of the shower, bent over to dry himself, and felt acute lower back pain and instantly knew that something wasn't quite right. But equally, after having that MRI, you could see in the report that there's quite a lot of stuff that was going on. Some of it's just wear and tear, and some of it's just, unfortunately, what he has been born with in terms of what he's been dealt. Back pain in taller people is actually quite common, but equally, back pain in a lot of people as we start to get older is also common, and it can be, sometimes it's a mechanics thing in terms of how you're lifting, but for a lot of it, I think that, and I don't put MG in this class because he's definitely not one that's quite sedentary, but a lot of people these days just sit. They sit in awkward positions, they sit on the couch. Human beings weren't designed to be sedentary. You know, we're designed to move, to hunt, to run, and I think these days so many people just sitting in excessive hip flexion, which you talk to any really good applied practitioner. Ben Lustig's the one that comes to mind because he does, as you know, I work with him pretty closely, refer a lot of my athletes to him as I think MG does a bit now too. But he specializes in lower back pain, works a lot with athletes, bodybuilders, CrossFitters. And one of his biggest things is people just sit way too much. And sometimes lower back pain can occur just as overcompensation. It could be a weak link up the chain. And so, as everyone knows, and you've heard us all say a million times, the body's designed to acclimate to the environment it's exposed to. So if it's put in a position that's potentially dangerous or harmful, we'll usually find a way to combat it. And sometimes that may mean, in this case, lower back, that lumbar region causing some grief. So I don't think there's a blanket statement to say that this is what causes it. There's a wide scope of things that would fall under that umbrella, but I think some of the things that you could do to help protect it is to move, to train your core, to be stronger on the anterior chain as well as the posterior chain. And another one is, being strong through the glutes. A lot of guys don't train glutes, and they overlook the fact that the role of the glutes is to stabilize the pelvis. And a lot of people think that training glutes is just to have a big ass and have nice curves, but that isn't necessarily the case. It's important to train it so that if your glutes are nice and strong, your pelvis is strong, you have stability, in which case, potentially you protect that lower back more. So
yeah, it makes complete. I think as they're getting older, the lower back can get sore. I think I'm definitely feeling that for sure. And you're right, having to make sure you keep moving, and we are sitting way too much. I actually have a standing desk, but I even find that too, like I can't just stand for long periods of time. I need to, bend over, touch my toes every now and then, twist the back, walk around, get moving. So I think not staying in one position, whether it's standing or seated in a long period of time is not a good thing. You need to keep moving for sure. And then, as you said, make sure you train those areas around that structure so that they're nice and strong. I think as you get a little bit older, and as you see older people that are going through injuries or issues, you really start to think how important it is to stay nice and healthy. All right, let's move on to some other questions. I think this one's come up. It's my fault. This one has come up because I've recommended this to one of my clients and they've posted about it. But is there any scientific evidence that wearing a waist trainer will help in any way, and how long to wear it? This is definitely my fault, bro. Sorry.
well, maybe you can tell us then why you, I don't even know. Who did you refer to wear it?
Got Amy to wear it. Yeah. I don't know if there's any scientific evidence, to be honest. For me, the reason why I gave it to her was for posing, and for her to know what it feels like to be in that position with the waist drawn in and nice and tight, right? So it's more so training the feeling of having your waist drawn in and being up nice and tall. And, the waist trainer is a really, really easy tool to use, and you can wear it often so you can start to identify what it feels like to have the waist nice and tight and drawn in, so that when you're posing, you hold that position, especially for her and for females, even for males, to be honest. But holding that position is going to be really, really important when we're looking at an X frame, where you've got to be really, really small in the waist and wide above and below that. We're talking about 1%ers here, and if you've got the money to spend and you want to give it a try, I would say definitely give it a go. But if you want to try to get a little bit of an edge and help yourself with controlling that area, especially when you're posing, so you know what it feels like to have the waist drawn in, that's the reason why we used it. So, and I actually like the name, it being trainer. It's not like a shrinker or something. It's literally training you to know what it feels like to be in that position. And that's the reason why I've recommended for her to use that. I've also recommended other people to use them too. So have you ever recommended it or had any thoughts about it?
I've never recommended anyone to wear a waist trainer per se with the goal of reducing waist circumference, because as far as I know, that there's no research to support that. I know that they're looking into the benefits of that, and they're looking into like weight belts and a lot of stuff in Asian countries who do a lot of manufacturing. But in terms of aesthetics and shrinking the waist, I think there actually is, this is testing, I think ages ago I read something. I think maybe it was a 2018 or a 2019 study. They looked at waist circumference with the continuous use of, I think they called it a smart belt or something like that. Anyway, it escapes me, it was a while ago, but it was an observational study. And anyway, they looked, again, the timestamps escape me, but it was like 4, 8, 12 weeks. And at the end of it, they showed that there was a bit of a difference in terms of wearing it, but it was a very, very like poorly designed study in that there was no control group, and they didn't track exercise hours, who ate what, who did what. So I think it's one of those things, and I'm in the camp of, if you're doing something and it makes you feel better, then by all means wear it. It's kind of like wearing a weight belt. I encourage athletes to wear a weight belt, not because it protects their lower back, but it teaches them to breathe intra-abdominally, to brace, and to be more controlled. And, I know that if I'm going to, deadlift a heavy barbell, that I'll always just feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that I can breathe and brace into my belt when I'm going to pull that. And I don't ever have any back pain. And again, maybe it's placebo, maybe it's not. If I was to do that same lift without a belt because it's something that I've just always done, maybe there would be a change. But it's one of those things where I'm like, if you feel good and it doesn't impact you, and all those people that are like, oh, you need to look at EMGs, it makes the waist bulky, blah, 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 all of that. I think that's a load of nonsense. You can definitely have a big waist as a result of training the muscles around that, too much and like any other group. But in this case, I don't see a problem with it. And I like the idea of it from a control perspective in the sense that you've prescribed this not with the goal of you're going to have a smaller waist circumference, but you're using it as a performance measure to try and assess and essentially try and improve her ability to be able to maintain that position, to pose in that position. So I think, why not? Again, is it a 1%er? Does it make a difference? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But if Amy notices a difference in her ability to pose, then why not do it? Equally, someone else could use it and then they perhaps may not. It's like people that do vacuum posing that don't vacuum. I know physique athletes that do vacuum posing because they feel that it gives them more abdominal control. And so I don't do that. And I feel I have good abdominal control. But equally, I know some people who swear by it. So I think it's one of those things. If it doesn't do you any harm, which in this case, I don't think that it does, and if it makes her feel good and her posing is better, why not?
Yeah, just on that point, I think having control of your midsection is really, really important in male and female posing across all divisions. I can't think of a division where you are hiding that area and you cannot be exposed. So, and especially in, let's call it top end bodybuilding, where we're talking about, the guts and things like that, is they're really, really critical now of people controlling their waist, even during transitions between poses. So I'm not saying they all need to wear a waist trainer, but you need to be aware of that area to make sure that when you are doing your posing, you're making sure that you're looking after that area too. All right, let's look at the next question. So I grouped these two together because they are definitely similar. So what is your opinion on the ideal length of an off season? So that's the first question. This question is very similar too. I'm an older competitor, would love to compete in season B after just competing in season A. Most coaches seem to want to give at least a 12-month rest to rebuild, which I understand. However, I've had a great season. My blood work is good. I just had it last week, and I don't want to wait another 12 months to compete. So I would say with this competitor here that's asking to compete back to back, I think it would really depend on how much change they want to make from season to season, and also maybe what division they were in. So let's call it, if you were in a muscle division where you had to get really, really lean and show your muscles, and you need to improve your mass, then you're going to have to go through some kind of surplus phase to do that. Within 2 seasons, back to back, you're not going to have enough time to maybe potentially make those changes, right? If you're in more of a model division, let's call it bikini, swimsuit, something like that, where really there's not much development need to be had. Maybe you're already at the top end. There's not much change you need to make, and you just want to go back to back because it suits your lifestyle. And maybe next year or the year after, you've got some things in your life that you need to commit to and you can't be competing, then I'd be okay about it. But I would always tell that client, we need to go through the reverse first. And we need to be successful in that phase first, reassess where your head's at, reassess where your metabolism and how you're feeling, and if all the comp prep feels are being washed off. And then from there, we can commit to whether we do the next season that's ahead of us, or whether we need to wait. That's kind of normally how I judge it. How long of an off season you need to have? I would say the shortest off season would probably be a full 12 months. So season B to season B, season A to season A. That's normally the shortest off season give someone. And again, if we're in the model divisions, you can probably get away with it. If you're in the muscle divisions, you might need a little bit longer if you've got to make some bigger changes. Scotty?
Yeah, I agree. I think, as you mentioned, the division that you compete in and the composition that you got down to is important. I think if you just come out of season A, and that probably answers it for us. If your blood work's really good and you're in a really good spot, I'm assuming they're referring to, is this a female as well, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'm assuming they're referring to sex hormone production, menstrual cycle, etc. Then the likelihood is that they probably didn't have to get drastically lean, because if you did, then I dare say that, markers like estrogen, sex hormone, binding globulin, free testosterone, things of that nature are going to be pretty much in the toilet, as you would expect when you do get towards that back end of prep. So maybe they're in a position. I definitely think for older athletes, there is I understand you don't want to go 1 year on, 2 or 3 years off because, you kind of want to compete when you're in that sport, and maybe you're in your genetic ceiling from a muscularity perspective as well. But I think a year to at least come out of that and then also take on board feedback, unless you're just, cleaning up everywhere and you just want to continue to go. And again, I think the only division that would be relevant is probably going to be in those divisions that you alluded to, the swimsuit and bikini. Otherwise, I think at a minimum, you need to at least take that next season off and then go again. So if you do season A 2024, you could look at season A 2025. But I would want to know, what does the judges' feedback, what does that look like in the sense of, have they told you need to fix this or fix that? Because as natural athletes, we can't just slap tissue on overnight. It takes time. And if you're in that candidacy where you don't perhaps need that and you think that your physique is great and you want to go again, then I think, a season on and then a season off, then maybe that's an option for you. But otherwise, at the minimum now, I think too many athletes underestimate the value of having a really good quality off season. And I think this is what we're seeing with so many young competitors coming through now that get on stage at like 20, 21, and they look ridiculous and they're contending for pro cards and opens and overalls. It's not because they just decided to pursue bodybuilding. They might have been working with a coach for 3-4 years prior. I know I have athletes in that camp, you do as well, that are able to see the bigger picture, and they've just been, in the shadows, making deposits, going away. And then when they come contest prep time, they've built a really good quality physique. So I think it's, until you've had that time and you've experienced what a good off season looks like, I think perhaps it can be very easy to just want to go straight into another contest prep.
That's a really good point. Yeah, if you've never had a proper off season, then maybe you might not be in that mindset of, I'll just go again. That's what I normally do. I just go season after season. But once you get into a good off season, you can really see the benefit of it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's jump on to the next one. Okay, so I feel like you only covered the live stream commentary and the judging of Maddie's division in the Nationals recap. This was no disrespect to anyone, to be honest. It's just that we got a question about Maddie. That was all. I don't think we intended to do a recap per se. I was the only one at the show, and I didn't get a chance to see absolutely everything. So I'm sure when all three of us boys are at a show and we can dedicate ourselves to make sure we watch majority of the divisions, we can definitely start to get back into doing full recaps of shows. But was no disrespect to any other division or anyone else, just that we just got that question. That's why we talked about that topic. We weren't able to do a full recap of the Nationals because I didn't get a chance to see everything, and I didn't want to judge or make a call on certain things if I wasn't there to see it. The next one is, I never hear news about INBA shows or athletes on any podcast I listen to. Is there any reason for this? I'm going to answer this, and I think the following questions kind of allude to this same federation, because I know they had their Nationals last weekend, and just the way these questions are worded, I feel like they're talking about that Fed. So even though it doesn't say that Fed, but anyways, why don't people talk about INBA shows? I think as the federation isn't as big as, say, an ICN or an NBA or an IFBB, so they just don't get as much coverage. People don't go to the show as much, not as many athletes competing in it. So it's hard for us to give advice, recap, or any discussion on them. So it's, again, no disrespect to the federation at all. It's just that we're not going to the federation to see those athletes. Anything you want to add on that, Scotty?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Again, it's never throwing shade at another Fed. Most people that listen to this would know that that's not what we're about. But I just, to be honest, I don't really hear much about them either. And I know I'm obviously on the other side of the world, but even before then, just then I was thinking, when was the last time I put someone in an INBA show? And I think it was maybe 2018. And that was a show that was in Ringwood, because INBA used to be really big, but I think they had a bit of turbulence with some different promoters. Perhaps they didn't get the same support when they parted ways with the whole ICN thing. So as far as I know, they just, I don't even know if they advertised. Did they have a VIX show in season A? If they did, I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, so they had a VIX show 2 weeks ago. Okay. And that was a qualifier to do Nationals in Queensland, and they had Nationals on the weekend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because even the season B just gone, I don't even know if there were shows for that in terms of the when. And this is what I'm getting at, I guess. If there are, perhaps they're just not getting the information out, because, I would say we would both have a pretty decent share of the market space in terms of working with physique athletes, and no one that I know has mentioned that show. And not because it's bad, but maybe because they just don't know about it. I mean, I would put myself in that camp as well. So I think maybe they're just in a bit of a rebuilding stage. I'm not too sure. But if they had a good show that was going to have some good quality competition and some decent athletes there, I don't see why, I wouldn't evade putting people in that show if it was good and it was at a good time and it was well run.
Yep, definitely. Okay, next question. I think it's to do with the same show. How are first-time competitors winning pro cards? Some don't have the intentions to ever compete again. Show numbers are so low, it's like the best of a bad lineup will walk away with the pro card. So obviously that show on the weekend, the lineups weren't big. They still have the rule that it's a national show. If you win the overall, you get your pro card. So as I've kind of said, you can only compete against who you're up against. If you're not up against big lineups, that's no fault of your own. And if the rule is that if you win the overall, you get your pro card, then the federation holds to that rule. I'm assuming the person that won a pro card was a first timer. So I think that's just how the chips fell on that day. I don't think it's any disrespect to that competitor or that federation. It's just they competed in a show where that rule applied, and that was the level of the lineup, and they were the best on the day.
When you say first time, that was their first season, or that was just the very first show they've ever done?
It says first time competitor, so I'll read it.
Because it does happen. I know lots of first time seasoned competitors that get their pro cards, and that was what we were talking about earlier. It's the time spent in the years prior to going into that. But if this was a small show lineup, it's one of those things, I guess you can only really beat who you compete against.
Yeah. The next question was, can you explain how a competitor can win figure and fitness? Surely you can't fit into both categories at the same time. The criteria is different. So again, some federations allow cross-competing in those two divisions. And again, if you're the best suited to the criteria above anyone else that's in the lineup, then I guess you can win both. It's not a common thing that happens, but yeah, if the lineups aren't big and the people that you're up against don't suit the criteria as well as you do, then potentially you could win figure and fitness at the same time. I don't know any other feds that allow that kind of cross-competing. NBA, you can't cross-compete fitness to figure, or fitness to figure international, I think you can, which is just the symmetry round only. But ICN, I don't believe you can do it. Or maybe in ICN New South Wales you can. ICN have different rules in every state, so sometimes it's a bit confusing to know which one's which. And I know definitely in like IFB or the rest of them you can't. So I'm assuming they're meaning INBA, because I know that you can in that federation there too.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. All right, next one, coaching. Is $120 per week too expensive for comp prep coaching? I feel like it's on the higher end of the scale, and they justify it by saying they want you to send them posing videos, but I'm already paying for a posing coach. So is $120 too much per week? And can they justify it because they're going to also give feedback to that person's posing?
I think 120 is definitely on the higher end. I don't necessarily think that sending through posing videos is like a special inclusion. At least it's not in my coaching service. I have one of my athletes whose check-in isn't even today, and they've sent through 14 videos for me to have a look at, which I encourage, because I always say if an athlete's enthusiastic, I'll match it 100%. And so in terms of ironing out some of those creases and looking at the mechanics of the lifts to try and better that, and this is what we talk about in the off season. If you have an athlete that's just going through the motions and they could be doing so many of these basics incorrectly, and you're not looking at some of these basic fundamentals, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, to try and correct it, then how can you expect them to improve? So for me, it's an investment. In this athlete's case, like I'll absolutely reply to that, even though it's not their specific check-in day, because they've taken the time to send that. And I include that from day one, as I'm sure you are exactly the same. So I'm not sure, to be honest, what other coaches do within their coaching practice, like what it incorporates and what it entails. I genuinely couldn't tell you. I've got a good idea of what you do, got a good idea of what Galanti does. But aside from that, I don't really know what anyone else does. I don't really take too much interest in it because it doesn't have any reflection or resemblance to me or to what I do. So if someone was like, it's an add-on to send through videos of exercises or of posing, that seems a little bit strange to me, because otherwise, especially in the improvement season, like what are you paying for? I don't necessarily ask for like, I want to go through your posing with a fine tooth comb because my athletes have a posing coach who has a better eye for that than I do. But if they're in prep, for example, most will send through their quarter turns and then they'll screenshot and then list each of their posing shots, find numbers, and we'll assess that, what we like, areas that perhaps show some improvement that may not. But again, I don't think that is a novelty or something that separates from like 100 to 120. But again, I'm not sure what other people do, so I can't really comment on that. Do I think 120 is expensive? Yeah, maybe. But equally, I think athletes have to understand that sometimes if you're paying a top coach good money, you're not just paying for that check-in, you're paying for that wealth of knowledge of knowing when to push, when to pull. For all you know, like, for example, people that have spent thousands and thousands of dollars, on academia in terms of getting not just an undergrad, if it's a master's, a PhD, whatever it may be. So without knowing who this coach is or what they do, maybe that's why they charge what they charge. But I don't really think we can sit here and say that is way too much without knowing the full context of what they offer. But I definitely don't think sending posing videos is anything that's overly special that warrants an increase in fees. What do you think?
Yeah, I tend to agree. Like, I know what us three all charge, and it's not that much as 120 a week, but maybe that coach is above and beyond all three of us. So potentially they're worth that extra money. Honestly, I get involved with absolutely every aspect, posing, exercises. The only thing I probably don't get involved with is like what earrings to wear on the day. Like I go through bikini color, cut, fit, heels, tanning. Like I go through every single aspect of everyone's prep. There's not one thing I don't get involved in, to be honest. And yes, sending through posing videos, me critiquing them, sending back all my suggestions, same as with exercises, all that kind of stuff. I don't see them as added extras. I see that as all part of comp prep coaching.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is, the more, and this is the way that I'm sure you're exactly the same we view it, is that by going above and beyond for those 1%ers essentially makes the athlete better. So when they step on stage, it's a better reflection of your coaching service and what you do. So why would you not go above and beyond? And equally, maybe that's the thing, it's not an arduous task for us to do that because it's all part and parcel of it, because they're all the requirements, as we spoke about, those low-hanging fruit that's going to make the difference. Those deposits accrued over time. So I think someone that's passionate about what they're doing, and again, I'm not saying that this coach isn't passionate. They may very well just be great at all of those things that we've just suggested. But I think some of the things that we've just listed, they're not really like, oh my God, these are wow things. They're just the basics that, in my opinion, most coaches should be doing if they're wanting to get the most out of their athletes. And maybe the ones that aren't doing that, perhaps that could be one of the reasons why some of their athletes aren't going as well as what they could be. But yeah, hopefully that answers this question.
All right. Next one is, will NBA come out with merch? So we actually had a discussion about this because we have to order a whole bunch of merch that goes in all our athlete packs. And we want to order a lot more because we actually want to sell our merch online. So yes, it's coming. And we're looking at broadening the product spectrum of what we're going to be having to sell. So we're looking into pullovers, hoodies, and all that kind of stuff too. So we're definitely coming out with NBA merch. It's coming soon. Stay tuned. All right. This one's for you, Scotty, because I got no idea. And to be honest, this question has come up a couple of times and I just keep avoiding it and skipping it because it's about supplements. It's about Turkesterone. Is it Turkesterone?
Turkesterone.
Yeah. What's your knowledge about it? What's your opinion of it? Is it useful? Is it safe? I got no idea, bro. I know I've looked into it once and all the stuff that I saw, it was like, it's not worth it. So then I just stopped looking into it.
Yeah. To be honest, when it first came out, I feel like it was widely used. I think it's used a lot in the enhanced side in terms of it's meant to help, from what I believe. Again, I'm not an expert in this space because from what I had read on it, there's not all that much in it, but it's meant to help promote lean muscle growth by just stimulating some of the signaling pathways associated with muscle protein synthesis. So yeah, to be honest, I don't really know much about it other than from what I understand, it's kind of just a junk product, kind of like people that take SARMs. I think people that are taking that thinking that it's because, again, I don't know, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on this space, but I think it's meant to, I believe, help to enhance free testosterone. It has some effect on testosterone production. And I think if it was, and this is how I look at it with supplements, if it was a really, really, really good quality supplement and it was enhancing performance, it would be banned by WADA. And WADA are pretty on top of this sort of stuff when a product comes out. If it's against, if it goes against the good faith of sport, and if it is something that enhances performance, and then needs to tick off 2 of those 3 things. And if it does that, then it's usually going to get their attention and most likely make its way on the ban list. So I think if something sounds too good to be true, then it usually is, unless you're talking about using an actual pharmacy grade ergogenic aid that's obviously a steroid. So again, I just think too many people are looking at those, what if this supplement could do this, as opposed to you look at all of the best physiques and ask them what they do. And again, they're grabbing the low hanging fruit, like making sure they get good quality sleep, they're training hard, they're eating sufficient food. They do those basics time and time again over time. And that is what is going to yield the result, not relying on a supplement that some influencer on Instagram has promoted to say that this is a crazy supplement and it's going to boost your testosterone levels and take your physique to different heights. I just don't think that's realistic.
Awesome. Okay. Do you guys implement any cardio for yourselves or for others in the off season?
Yeah, I do on rest days for a lot of my athletes, more for cardiovascular health, especially some of the boys that tend to get a little bit bigger, just so that they can manage life, and also just from a health first perspective. But equally, sometimes it can help with regulation of appetite, because if you are having to eat a lot of food, it can be an arduous task to get in sufficient calories. So by doing a bit of cardio, it definitely helps with that. But also just to maintain a good routine, and also just from, like I said, a cardiovascular perspective, I think as we get heavier, again, bodybuilding in the off season, it should be really healthy. But I think if you're just neglecting doing any cardio at all, that can be deleterious to your health. So I think it's good whether it's 15, 20 minutes. I know a lot of people who don't like to do lots of steps and they're time poor. So it's better for them to just jump on the bike a couple of times a week and then just do a light cycle session, equally from an active recovery perspective. So I don't prescribe it to all my athletes, but I'd say probably 1 in every 2 probably does a little bit of cardio in the off season.
Yeah, for me, it's more so just steps. Like, I don't normally get them to jump on a piece of equipment unless they want to, or it's raining outside, or they like to do that instead of doing steps. But the usual 8 to 10K steps a day in the off season is a good place to kind of be for most people. So I call that staying regularly active and not being super inactive. I think that's kind of like my go-to for majority of people, unless they need a little bit more to influence their appetite. Then, or some people are just active in general, they have an active job, so I won't have to give them a step target or goal or cardio, because they're already pumping out 12, 15K steps just in their job. So if anything, I tell them on the weekends to back off and just chill out a little bit, so they can rest and recover and take care of themselves. Another one about cardio. Ideally, what cardio and steps would you like your clients to begin prep with? This is like so much of a hard question to answer, because it really depends on their stuff.
How long's a piece of string? Yeah,
it depends on where they're currently at. But would you say that from a percentage base, you probably adjust the calories more than what you adjust their cardio and steps for the first adjustment when they begin prep? Yeah, so I think the biggest adjustment comes from their calories first, but I do adjust both. It's just a bigger adjustment is from their calories. And then there is also an adjustment from a steps or cardio perspective, but the bigger percentage adjustment is from their calories. Would you say the same thing, Scotty?
Yeah, I think food first is always going to be easier, because typically food will have been a lot higher. But again, cardio is a tool that we have in the toolbox, knowing when to play it. I think if you've been doing 2 sessions a week throughout the off season and you want to keep doing 2 sessions, it's probably going to remain in play. But equally, prep is all about pushing and pulling and knowing when to push and when to pull. And you don't want to, in my opinion, have way too much expenditure coming from an exercise perspective too early, because then it can be hard to retreat from that. And also you have to weigh up the recoil of that, the systemic and peripheral fatigue that comes with that. Again, cardio can be really advantageous in terms of helping increase the magnitude of the deficit. And there's, good research to support that pairing energy deficit with an exercise deficit can have a really positive effect on total daily energy expenditure versus just being in an energy deficit as a result of food. And obviously that makes a big difference in terms of metabolic adaptation, because contest prep is not usually just a 12-week prep. You're talking about 20 to 30 weeks from first show to last show. So they're all things that you need to be mindful of. But again, as you mentioned, without knowing each athlete's starting point, it can be challenging. Someone might only have to lose 7 or 8 kilos. They've had a really good pre-prep phase. Other people may have like 15 or 16 kilos in which case maybe they're going to have to do more of that. But again, as always, and people probably hate me saying this, context is important.
Got to put that on a t-shirt, I reckon, bro.
Context is important. Yeah.
That's the next t-shirt for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Another question. These next three came from the same person. I like them. They're pretty good. If a competitor is not conditioned for their category, do they still need to carb up?
No.
Do you want to delve a little bit deeper into that? Like why, if you're not conditioned, carbing up is not really going to make too much of a difference?
Well, that was probably a blanket statement. No, I guess that's probably because my opinion. One thing I find that it almost baffles me when you have a bikini competitor sometimes, and I hear or see them talking about their carb up when they're not in a position for restoring, large amounts of muscle glycogen. Is it going to make any difference to their physique? Probably not, because they're just not lean enough for it to warrant that. And equally, if they don't have a whole lot of muscle underneath, then equally you're not really going to see the benefits aesthetically. The whole point of a carb up, you're looking at obviously saturating muscle glycogen stores, pulling fluid into the muscle to create the illusion that it's bigger. When you've got someone that's super lean, the difference between full and flat can be night and day. It makes a really big difference. But if the conditioning is not there, then you don't have that gap between the muscle and obviously the skin. So you've just got a layer of adipose tissue, and usually adding in more carbs may just result in some edema, and they just, in my opinion, they tend to look potentially worse. I think sometimes if you've got someone that's not as conditioned, bringing them in flatter might actually help because they'll just look a bit tighter, even if they're potentially not. But I think if you haven't, or if you're finding that your athlete's not as sharp as they need to be, then I think you need to assess the intervention that you put in play and try and fix that. I've had athletes where I've taken them on during their prep because of extreme circumstances, and we haven't been in the position that I would have liked us to be in from where we're at, and have had to dig all the way until the day before the show and literally just pushing carbohydrate the day of, and choose to play the card of coming in a little bit flatter potentially, but equally trying to grab every little bit of conditioning that we can, because that is going to help them in terms of the look and the aesthetics, as opposed to me saying we're not where we want to be, but we're just going to carb you up and potentially lose some of that detail, which we're fighting tooth and nail for. So for me, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. I think you're better off focusing on pushing all the way up to the finish line. And this is why I think the whole 12-week contest prep is probably dead now, unless you've got someone that's walking around lean all year round, or they're a bikini competitor, because the conditioning requirements just get better and better every single season. So you need to build sufficient time into your timeline. And equally, you need to make sure that you're not drifting too far away within your off season, or if you are, you have to allow sufficient time to get back to a decent starting point, because I think too many athletes, and this is not just girls or guys, but probably do get unnecessarily soft in the improvement season, thinking they're making all these crazy gains. But in reality, they're probably not. Like, you hear guys, I was at a cafe a couple of weeks ago and I heard a young guy saying how he's been gaining, around about 1.2 kilos a week. He's up 5 kilos in the last month. He's made all these crazy gains. I'm like, man, you're just getting fat. Like, if you were gaining that amount of muscle, you speak to the enhanced crowd. They're not even gaining that amount of quality tissue, or those that are in the open divisions, they're running stupid amounts of drugs, and they're just genetic freaks that to be able to achieve that. So I think if you're like, oh, I've gained in 6 months a kilo of muscle, but I've also gained 17 kilos of fat, would you have rather gain 700 grams of quality muscle and only gain 6 kilos of fat? I would much rather 700 grams of 6 kilos than a whole kilo of muscle, but equally 18 kilos of fat, because whatever you've gained, you're probably going to lose that when you got to diet that off anyway.
Yeah, you're exactly
and
right.
They're things that you need to give consideration for. There's nothing wrong with being a little bit further away from potentially where you think or you thought you may be in the improvement season. If the trade-off is sleep's amazing, training's amazing, everything's good, relationship with food is good, that's fine. It just means, okay, cool, maybe we're 2 or 3 kilos above where we thought our ceiling would be. So it just means that we probably need to add another 3 or 4 weeks to our pre-prep phase, or maybe we need an acute 4-week mini cut within our timeline somewhere that we hadn't originally planned for, to just get us back within striking distance.
Yeah. So going back to, if you've got someone who's not lean enough, look, they're close to the show, you're not going to get them any leaner. Would there still be a positive of pushing in some carbs from a sense of, okay, maybe it might wash off some cortisol, some fluid retention, pull some water in, relax them a little bit more, maybe fill them out a little bit? Is it better to do something than absolutely nothing?
It can be, but again, without knowing how much they're having, if you've got a bikini competitor's had like 50 grams of carbs and you're like, we're doing a 400-gram carb up, nothing good is going to come of that. But maybe, and this is where you wouldn't just go from 50 to 200. Okay, maybe day one, if you want to do it from 3 days out, if you think that washing off fatigue is going to make a difference, maybe day one is 100 grams of carbs, see the look. If it's looking better, okay, cool. Let's try 125. Let's go 150. Let's go 175 over the next 3 days. But if you don't really see a difference, then it may just be to try and, curb hunger. I think there's almost just like a stigma that peak week means carb up.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always the way that it goes. So it would depend on your athlete, how they respond. But I'll be more nervous if I've had someone on super low carbs for an extensive period of time. I don't necessarily know how long or how well they're going to respond to pushing in large amounts. So you usually have to tread very, very carefully, because otherwise you might see, some crazy edema as a result of their body just not being all that familiar with that metabolic pathway, because they haven't had that amount of food for some time. Or if you are, you just need to be more considerate about the foods you choose, blends between glucose and fructose, using caffeine potentially when you're carbing up to help aid partitioning, etc.
So if you've got someone lean enough, but they've been on low carb for a long period of time, would you essentially maybe try to front load them? So load them at the start of the week to give you more time to see the reaction of putting in carbs into a body that hasn't had a lot of carbs?
Yeah, so I would linearly load. So I would just gradually. So let's just, as a base model, let's say they're on like 75 grams of carbs and the show's next Sunday and you're starting Monday. Maybe I'd go 125 on a Monday, assess the look. Yep, it's good. It doesn't really look any different. Okay, let's go 175. Let's also use some caffeine with our high carbohydrate meals, although maybe you're just going to run, say, 40 grams of carbs per meal, because most people would be able to tolerate that, versus having a large bolus and then maybe you can't tolerate that amount, and then just gradually going up. And I'll always usually like to have a day before where we can pull back to allow some of that fluid retention as a result of the increased carbohydrate, because sometimes your body just needs time to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might have your last high day. This is something that I usually do. It might be on, if the show's on a Saturday, the last high day will be on a Thursday. I'll pull back on a Friday and then still keep carbs in, but nowhere near as high, and then roll into Saturday and then assess where the look is at. Because the other thing you're factoring in, expenditure is going down. And if you're continuing to feed up, you need to be mindful that this person, they might have been, doing a ton of exercise. And yes, you want to wash off fatigue, but you also don't want to spill them. And then if you go high the day before and then you wake up, it's like, oh, we've got a problem here because they're spilled. It's a lot hard to fix that, versus if someone looks flat, easy. You can push in carbs every hour if you need to try and correct that. So I think I always play it a little bit more safe, because I think you've got the ability, if someone's not full, you can just keep feeding them, keep pumping them up. You can push sodium. There are a lot more tools at your disposal. If someone wakes up and they're overly spilled, you've got to pump them hard all morning and try and chew through some of that to try and correct the look.
Yeah, and it makes sense, because got more leeway if you need to feed someone up a little bit more, and essentially if you have a little more time on the show day, then if they're spilled and you're like, maybe you got to go to the gym, man, and and like get a really, really good workout or a pump to wash some of this off, because we're not in a good spot.
Yeah, well, we talk about a 2-day like turnaround shows, as a lot of people know, I've had athletes the last couple of seasons that have had them. And one of the things that I get them to do as soon as they finish their show is they'll train for a good 75 to 90 minutes that afternoon after their comp to try and push through all of that. And then they wake up the next morning and they're usually flat, which I'm like, okay, I'd much rather that, because I know I can bring you back to life in 4 or 6 hours than if they wake up and it's like, wow, they're still spilled.
Well, what's the longest it's taken for someone to get back to baseline? Have you ever seen it go over 2 or 3 days?
If they've overfed and eaten like an asshole.
Yeah. Oh no, they followed the plan. If they've
okay, if they follow the plan, for the most part, most of the time, because my protocol that I usually run is they have a bunch of coconut water in terms of getting some potassium in, a lot of fluid, and then they usually have a decent like filling meal after they get off stage, so the desire to eat like an asshole is not there. And then they'll usually have a big session. It's either entire body or EB pull or legs. And then the meal before bed is literally just some protein. There's no sodium. And then again, lots of fluid. They normally wake up the next morning. They'll either be lighter than they were the day before, or they might be a couple of 100 grams up. They'll always go and do cardio fasted. And usually after that cardio session, which is usually a bike session, they look like they could get on stage that afternoon.
Yeah, normally
Because
for
it's
me,
all you're really correcting is just the sodium. And again, we're pushing an acute dose later. So it's natural that we're going to see some edema once blood sodium concentrations are elevated, because your body takes fluid intracellularly to try and balance out that extracellular tonicity, so that obviously you're back to equilibrium, because your body's extremely smart in terms of restoring homeostasis. But usually, and this is why I think training legs is a good thing, because sometimes if you are starting to see some edema, those bigger muscle groups they're going to chew up a lot more energy as well, and you're usually going to sweat a lot more. And again, if you've had a large amount of salt, sweating is one of the best things to help to relieve that and get some of that salt out, and then you rehydrate, and then everything sort of comes back to baseline.
yeah, normally I have most people done by the second weigh-in, so the second morning after the show. And the day after the show, I normally get them to reduce their sodium intake. Sometimes even
absolutely.
Just because it's already in there, it's already circulating from the day before, so there's no need to have it as high as what it was, and just bring it back down a little bit. And normally by that second morning, it's back to where we need to be.
And sometimes it will depend on what time you get off stage too. If you got someone that's competed lunchtime or in the morning, they'll be back at baseline probably the next day. But if you got off stage late at night, you're probably going to have a crappy weigh-in the next day, which is not important. But equally, the day after that, you'll be back to normal. But I always think, even if you finish late, I just think it's better to go and to train and move around, because sometimes you wake up a little bit swollen if you haven't, because you haven't sweated out, you haven't got a lot of that sodium out. And if you don't do that, it can take a little bit longer, because your body is perhaps wondering you've gone straight to sleep after this huge bolus of sodium and all this carbohydrate, and you've done nothing of it. So I think sometimes it's better for the athlete, because they're a lot less stressed when they wake up. It's like, oh, I'm only like 500 grams up than what I thought I would be. And you're like, yeah, and tomorrow you'll be down, so don't stress. Yeah. Whereas if they wake up and they're 2.5 kilos up and they're swollen and they're like, fuck, which, sometimes that happens. Yeah.
All right, next one. ICN Nationals. There is so many states and different shows you could do. Assuming the competitors are going to Nationals to win their pro card, should Nationals just have open divisions and not have all the other divisions? I don't mind that idea. For ICN, I think it would work okay. For NBA, we actually do, the state that we do Nationals is also their state show. So if we do the Nationals in Melbourne, that's the first show in Melbourne done for that season, etc. Right? Whereas this person's right. ICN have normally 2 shows in every state in one season, and then they have a Nationals. So at Nationals, could you just have open divisions only and not have the first timers, the under 23s, the mums, etc.? I don't mind the idea. I guess the show would go a lot quicker and we wouldn't be there until 11 o'clock at night. What do you think, Scotty?
I don't think it will ever happen, because I think on a business level, federation is not going to make any money doing that. And I think in terms of inclusivity, not everyone is competitive in an open lineup. Maybe you've got a 50-year-old male or female who's worked hard all year, and they're not interested in trying to compete against the 22-year-old hotshot that's taken, the federation by storm. They want to see where they stack up with all the other 50-year-olds in the country, and see where they can compare in their relevant division, because not everyone is going to be able to contend and hold their own in opens forever. So I think it kind of elongates the sport. If you really love bodybuilding, it allows you to continue to pursue it in a competitive format until you don't want to do it anymore. And credit to one thing ICN have done really well for a long time is they've had over 40s, over 50s, over 60s. And at some of those big events, there's still lots of people, the figure, the men's physique divisions, bodybuilding, they still get on stage and have a crack. And I think those athletes are just as important as the ones that are competing for pro shows, because they essentially are showing that you don't have to be 18, 19, you don't have to have Instagram to love this sport. They're healthy, and it in a lot of ways, it's probably prolonging the quality of life as well, because they're living a really healthy life. I know people think that bodybuilding isn't inherently healthy, but I would argue that it's only really when you're in a period of energy deprivation that is not. Otherwise, you're eating really, really well, you're exercising daily, you're lifting weights, you're promoting longevity and living a good quality life. I think there's a lot of positives that come from that. So I think for the 2 reasons, that's why it will never happen.
Yeah, I like that. I think one thing, if this person is saying that because the shows are so big and there's so many people, one thing they could do, which they'll never do because it's, obviously not going to make them as much money, is don't let people compete in so many different divisions and categories and restrict them. Only restrict them to be able to do 3, 4, or 5, not 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So that's the only thing I can think of. But yeah, that's not going to make them any money if they don't let them do everything they want to do, for sure. Okay, last one from this person, and probably the last one we're going to wrap up this poddy on is, does ICN do Masters Pro cards? I don't believe they do, but when I went to Korea this time last year, they actually gave them out. So that was something interesting. They also gave out pro cards in divisions that we don't normally give pro cards out. Like they gave a swimsuit pro card, which I've never seen before, and some pro cards for other divisions. So there isn't super consistency across everything, but not in Australia. They don't do any Masters Pro cards, but I have seen it done overseas in ICN.
Okay.
All right, that's it. You got to go start your day. I've got to go end my day.
Yeah, I think we did okay without MG. We held it down, but obviously keen to get the great man back next week if he's up to it.
Yeah, definitely. He might be in surgery. He might be maybe from the hospital bed. We'll do a potty.
Yeah, we'll just see if the surgeon can. He surely has a laptop, right? We'll just ask him to pop it up on top of the cabinet and just zoom in from time to time.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. All right, mate.
Good, bro.
It was good
All right,
chatting.
bro. Good to chat to you. Thanks for listening, guys.
Take care. See ya.